Estes e outros conteúdos estão disponíveis em www.beiratv.pt.
This is where the lion-livered, long-loved Leo lived and lounged, sauntered and snoozed, panted and peed, barked and bounded, sharp-fanged, ruthless killer of fleas. His world was the malodorous bases of walls, rat-rich, rank garbage heaps, and the suspicious sense of sundry others of his canine kind. Snarling scourge of cowardly cats and timid terrorizer of tourists, Leo lived for the gentle fondling approval of old ladies, and the rough and tumble, rumbustious squealing joy of children. Here in his kennel, he quivered and whimpered as he dreamed siesta dreams of chasing rabbits, of devastating his enemies, and conquering long-legged, simpering, heat-radiating females. The dusty corners that Leo sniffed are still there, while amongst the rubbish heaps and the lamppost borders of his territory, a new generation of cats slink unchallenged. For long-tongued Leo, long gone, is now just a blur in two dog-eared snapshots. And on his kennel, his proud name fades in sunlight fierce as a lion. Morning, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Rafe Mills. Rafe, R-A-L-P-H, is pronounced Rafe, but I can't pronounce any Portuguese, so I forgive everybody, whatever they call me. And I'm a first-year PhD student at MIRIAD, and I'm studying for miniaturization. Thought I'd just show you a bit about what miniaturization actually is. If you look at this scene, this is a working-class, rural cottage, a famous painting in Manchester Art Gallery, and there on the mantelpiece, above the fireplace, above the hearth, are some small objects. And these are the things, these little ordinary things are the things that I'm studying. Here's a Victorian 19th century, again, a mantelpiece with little things on it that are of interest to me. And I carry on studying these things into the present day. These are displays from what in Britain are called charity shops, places where objects go when they're abandoned by their original owners and are then perhaps hopefully rebought by other people. And these are hundreds of pieces, tiny pieces of 19th century pottery that I dug up on my vegetable garden. I now have about 500 of these tiny fragments. And these are tiny sherds of pottery that are collected together with human waste, what we call in Britain night soil, which was collected from the outside lavatories of houses, working class houses, and transported to the fields and spread on the fields as fertilizer. And amongst the human waste was the sweepings from the yards, the little tiny bits of broken pottery. And of those 500 pieces, I've got about 400 different vessels, different types of pottery. So lots and lots of different objects. And this is a rather better condition than the ones I have, but I put this in because this was made in Staffordshire, and it's called Portugal, and was actually exported to Portugal in a sort of reverse of, I know Portugal has a ceramic industry, and they were in competition, but this one came from Staffordshire in the 19th century. Now, my background is in archaeology, so I'm looking at my practice is archaeology and writing. And here I am back in the 1970s on a Roman dig, and here I am on a Bronze Age dig. But my interest has become more and more recent. I'm now interested in the recent past. So I call myself a historical archaeologist. And on Monday, your Vice President mentioned the students of 1968 wanting to change the world. Well, I was a student in 1968, and now I'm a student again, and still wanting to change the world, if only a tiny bit. And my mission is to change our view of the ordinary, of the everyday, the mundane, the so-called humble things that in Paulo's words yesterday, can be beautiful and rich of meaning. I'm also interested in memories, and memories are being produced all the time. We mustn't freeze memories or put them behind glass or kill or fossilize the past. this town, this area, is hugely special, but I don't think it should ever be what they call a living museum. I don't like that phrase. So I'm going to call this area an archaeological term. It's an assemblage. Assemblage is a collection of things that exist at a particular moment of time in the same context. And they may be related, like an assemblage of pottery, or they may be an assemblage of what archaeologists call small finds. Bits of metal, coins, bone objects, pins, wood, and so on. So the town, to me, is a collection of material objects and memories curated by everyone. And that collection is dynamic. It's being added to all the time, and things are being taken away all the time. And these ordinary things reflect what someone yesterday called the interior of ourselves. Every historical archaeologist begins their career by reading a book by an American archaeologist, James Dietz, called In Small Things Forgotten. And Dietz famously realized that the lives of ordinary people were just as important to those as elites, and that we knew as little, if not less, about the people who lived in the recent past, that's yesterday, than we do about those from ancient times. And yet their evidence for their existence is everywhere. Their homes, their gravestones, and their material culture. And we just didn't, and often still don't, recognize and value that evidence. When I was a field archaeologist, we would often dig quickly through the uppermost layers of a site, and through what we'd call the unstratified and the overburdened, the disturbed, in our haste to reach the medieval and earlier deposits underneath. I joke now, not sort of slightly wryly, that I spent 20 years destroying my future research material. But then I realized that if we didn't change our strategies, we'd end up with a huge gap in the archaeological record and the historical record, and people in the future would look back on lots of material up until the end of the 18th century, and then there'd be a big gap, and certainly not very much about ordinary people. But surely we know everything about the 19th and 20th centuries, don't we? And the truth is we don't. This is Manchester. This is a recent excavation just a few months ago, just over the road from where I'm studying. And this is a basement dwelling, very poor dwelling. You actually lived almost totally underground. This is the fireplace here. These buildings were only demolished in the 1940s, and yet we knew nothing about them. We knew they were there, but the way they've been built, the things they contain, there's a blocked doorway at the back there and a room completely filled with material. And on the left-hand side there you can see, on the right-hand side there you can see an arch, which we have no idea what that arch did at the time. So if we can forget stuff that was only demolished 50, 60 years ago, there's obviously a lot of stuff that we don't know. I'd like to thank Christina and her partners for inviting me to come take part in this event, think about my approaches to the challenges faced by your area. But it would be arrogant and foolish of me, I'm the first time I've ever been to Portugal, and the first time to this area and to your town, and as someone who doesn't speak Portuguese, to pontificate, to make instant interpretations, draw conclusions, and to suggest solutions. However, in my PhD research, I'm recording what I call encounters, in which I relate my personal memories of meeting the objects I'm studying and the people and contexts in which they occur and occurred. And so I thought I'd share some of my encounters with this area here, as seen through my eyes as a historical archaeologist, someone who's interested in the archaeology of the recent past, yesterday, and even the archaeology of today. Okay, this is a rocky area. Stone is the obvious place for me to begin. It's the first thing that struck me when I came here. And stone is a bit of a paradox. It's existed for millions of years. Yesterday we saw the fossils, 450 million year old fossil paths of trilobites feeding. And those stone will exist for millions more years. So we actually experienced stone for just a minuscule fraction of its timeline. And actually we're still in a stone age. And yet we do affect stone, and we quarry it, and we chisel it into shape, and we live with it, and we build with it. We scratch graffiti on it, and we live with its corners and wall. This is a fantastic bit of wall just on the edge of town, which I fell in love with. At the bottom there is the natural, it's the bedrock. And then above that, the stone, the wall builders have built this beautiful wall, which almost is sort of married to the natural there. It's you can see that just this sort of the continuation of the million-year-old bedrock and the however many year old wall. is almost continuous. And here, everywhere, what we call sets, in the roadways and on the pathways, nature creeping in there as well. Wonderful stuff for someone like me who's interested. And then I get little discoveries. I go around a little street in the middle of the old town, and there, propped up as probably a doorstop, is a column base. It's probably Roman. And it will probably outlive me and the people who found it in a dump and used it. It's got a hole bored in it. It's been used as a weight or something in the past. Fantastic. And then I have various obsessions. One of them is wondering what blocked doorways, who walked through that door? What does that door, what can it remember of all the things that went on? And then it was blocked. And the same with windows. Who looked through that window? What interactions with the world happened? Stone. And stone is also about change. Although it seems to be immortal, here we've got one wall which stops. And then later on someone's come along and built another wall. Completely different methods, but a discontinuity and very clear archaeological things like this. I get archaeologists very excited. And then stone is around long enough for it to become the home of lichens, like this one, that are going to produce new soil from it. They're going to etch it with their acids and make new. And this is a lovely example in Idanha-a-Velha, inside a farm building, a very, very ordinary building. But what you've got here is a block, is a change where they've got a doorway which has got a wall stuck straight into it. Change over time, change of use and who knows what else. Stone can record us falling in love. It can also record the rather sad fact that we fall out of love. It can record and have memories that are associated with pain. This is apparent. I learned that this is where they used to hold animals when they were being branded and castrated. You can also memorize the visits of people from outer space. Next thing is clay. Clay is, I was thinking as I was putting this together that we have Stone Ages and we have Iron Age and we have atomic ages, but we don't have a clay age, and yet clay has a huge effect. We almost define humankind by the different types of clays and what we do with them. And this area, of course, is full of the wonderful things we do with clay. And being an archaeologist, of course, I walk around with my nose to the ground, and this is a little piece of medieval pottery that I noted in passing. And then I go on to metal. I'm going to, because I could talk about some of these, metal is one of my great loves. If you go to my website, it says, this is a website of rust and industrial archaeology. Rust is one of my favorite things. Lovely color. It's a sort of pigment. It's a pigment of the past in many ways. So I go around taking, the local people and the local dogs were very interested in me peering very closely at the rusty doors. And here's a device holding a door. The rest of the building is falling apart, but this piece of iron here is actually still holding the door in place, so you can't get through. And what stories can a chain tell us about what it did during its working life? And rust everywhere. And then this is an old mattress that's been used as a gateway. What stories can mattresses tell us? They can tell us about life, birth, death, all kinds of things. A memory that's somehow incorporated in that rusty gateway. Next is wood. Wood is very cunning stuff. It's sort of, we attack trees, we chop down trees. Trees often older than us, and then the wood gets its revenge. By the moment we cut it down, it starts to disappear again. And we paint it, and we varnish it, and we do all kinds of things to try and preserve it, but we never win. And the wood continues to decay and disappear. But for archaeologists, wood is wonderful stuff because it's got growth rings in it, and we can use what's called dendrochronology to date when the trees, the things that were happening with the trees, and when the buildings were that used the wood were built. And even when the wood is burnt, the charcoal preserves time, and we can date things from the amount of carbon-14 left in the charcoal. Glass I've always regarded as a sort of miraculous substance. It's just melted sand. That's all it is, and yet it can do wonderful things like this. But glass is a barrier. And glass, the breaking of glass is a very significant thing because it's breaking the barrier between inside and outside. It's letting the outside that we want to keep outside in, and it's destroying the security of the inside. And so, and it's also recording the memory of a stone being thrown. And windows, again, they're sort of the herald of the end of a era. And then doorways. Doorways are probably the one point of a home that we come into contact with the most. They absorb us. They absorb our there's oils on there from hands and fingerprints and whatever, and they're very significant objects. And objects on them attract our touch. And here, two identical door knockers, but one's been used much more than the other. And what's the story behind the differential use of these objects? And we mustn't forget that we have met animals, and we have to remember animals, the parts they play in our lives. And this is an abandoned barn, but it still has the last hay in it. The roof has fallen in and it's falling apart, but still there's a memory of what was going on there before. Memory of production. I have no idea. I'm hoping someone can tell me what these barrels would have been used for. As I sneaked around the corner there. Lovely building, lots of changes of use. And then we have memories of tough times. This is an environment which can be very hard to live in sometimes. And here's an example of a little pocket of earth. Here, probably half a metre diameter, tree growing out of it, and also a cabbage at the bottom. So they're squeezing two things into the same space. A little stone wall to contain what little earth there is in that spot. And I really love this. This is a house with pretension. Well, it's probably got 3 or 4 rooms in it at the most. Tiny house. And yet the person who had that house had pillars painted on it. It's the grandeur of having great pillars on the front of your house, even though it's only 4 meters wide. And so that's a memory of an attitude. We can look at places, and think about the people who actually lived there and begin to sort of think about their personalities. And then we've got abandonment, the slight melancholy of things being, here's blind windows looking out at a lovely view and not being seen. And then there's the crumbling of the stone, the returning. And this is almost, we get very, very philosophical about this in archaeology because this becomes just part of the normal turning of the stones are dug up, they build a building out of it, and it starts to decay almost at once, and in the end it almost returns once again to its original state. Like iron rusting away and becoming iron ore again, iron oxide again. And the contents of the home. But still on the wall there's a memory of paint. Someone painted that wall white and blue. There was taste there. Someone said, I want a white wall, I want a blue dado on it. And then there's rubbish. Archaeologists are very good at sort of making ourselves pompous and saying, we have a very long name, archaeologists. But actually all we do is look at people's rubbish. It just happens to be old rubbish. This is new rubbish. And if we're not careful, we're going to lose the information that new rubbish can provide. Why is almost every little pile of rubbish I've come across in these towns has roofing tiles in it? There's some sort of thing about, if you've got a roofing tile, you need to chuck it over the next door neighbour's wall to get rid of it. And here's another one. And I think we need to make more of this, and perhaps actually sort of have an exhibition of rubbish just to show what people are living next to and what's happening, what they're doing when they're actually throwing their roofing tiles over the wall and bits of paper and whatever. And then there's the memory. This is First day here, I went for a stroll, 15 kilometers. I went eastwards, and I just followed a lane. The first lane I came to, and eventually the lane just stopped. The tarmac ran out. And I had to think, well, do I carry on or not? I know I don't have a map, I don't have anything. But I decided to carry on. And I went into this lovely lane, old lane, with cork oak either side of it. Got a bit iffy a bit further on, but then I came across this area which has got these beautifully laid stones at the bottom of the lane. And it obviously was a very old mule path, mule track that was existed. So here it is, going along between stone walls. And in the end, it disappeared into the reservoir, which is obviously, and again, there's memory. So this is full of the memory of, can you imagine all the mules and whatever they were dragging along this track, the carts. I mean, it's probably good enough condition to have carts on this one. Just a couple of fun ones at the end. Memory of something, a party in a building. How long ago was that party? That building is falling apart, but yet there's still a memory of clinging to it, of something small. And I love this. This is a concrete pot with plastic flowers in it. And you're surrounded by gardens where you can grow anything, and beautiful colours and flowers and things. And someone thought, well, what I'm going to do is have a concrete pot and have plastic flowers in it. But of course it doesn't need watering very often. And so it reflects the thinking of someone perhaps mischievously doing that. And the memory of a bicycle, no longer. To finish with, I'm just going to read this little bit. This is Idanha-a-Velha, and this is the old lady of Idanha-a-Velha. One cool spring morning in 2010, an old lady wearing green tights sat on a low wall beside her patch of vegetables, her eyes closed. She was 7 or 8, bare-legged, barefooted, skipping amongst the warm old walls and the flapping washing, the air rich with the scents of the animals that rustled in the hay in the gloom of the barns. The old lady, tanned almost as brown as leather, sighed beneath her wide-brimmed hat. A dog barked and a car trundled past across the cobbles. She opened one eye to note that this car was stranger than most. It had something, a lump on the edge of a black pole, sticking up from its roof. Ha! She shook her head. The little girl was running joyfully towards the music, the beat of the adufe echoing round the little village square, the singing of women, her mother, her grandmother, her aunts set against the gruff drone of men's conversations. A donkey brayed. Goat bells clattered and clanged. A cat slinked away in the shadows. The strange car rumbled past again in the opposite direction and was gone. The old lady sighed again. There was no music, only the chirping of birds, the stridulation of grasshoppers, and the buzz of flies in the sunshine. She slowly stood and turned to watering her cabbages. When I visited that same spot a couple of days ago, the old lady had disappeared, and her vegetable garden was overgrown. Yet Google Street View had captured her, a moment from the recent past, forever lost, but nevertheless remembered. And she is. Thank you.